Now, I have a very great honor to introduce one of America's greatest patriots, Ambassador John Bolton. You know, we are so lucky to have him here tonight. Now, Ambassador John Bolton has a long and distinguished career of public service. He was an Assistant Attorney General in the Justice Department. He was Assistant Secretary of State for International Organizations in the State Department. He was Undersecretary of State for Arms Control, where he took it to the Iranians and the North Koreans, tried to stop their nuclear programs. And of course, he was the United States Ambassador to the United Nations. And I had the honor of serving as his Chief of Staff in that capacity. And I saw an amazing man there. Obviously, he did so much to root out corruption at the UN. Independent Audit Committee, mandatory financial disclosures. He exposed the anti-American and anti-Israel bent of the UN like no one had ever done before. But I saw a different side of him. Those are the things you know. I saw a guy that would go into a negotiating session and meet with these very arrogant ambassadors from other countries that did not like our country, and saw him wear them down. There was one negotiation where they were like, okay, 6 o'clock, time to go to dinner. We're all done. He said, no. I've already arranged to have dinner brought in. We're staying here. We're staying here, and then 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, they're getting tired, they're nodding off, and he negotiated and would not give up, and by 1 a.m. we got everything we needed, because these people just threw up their hands and gave up. They just gave up. And I want to tell you something else about Ambassador John Bolton. It's very easy. With me, I'm a boss of 120 people in the State Auditor's Office. When I was in the State Department, we had 4,000 people working for us. You always want your people to be loyal to you. That's the way you want your employees to be loyal. But how many bosses are loyal to their employees? That's harder to find. Ambassador Bolton, when he heard I was running for state auditor, with all the work he's doing on Fox News and writing and contributing, he said, you tell me where you want me to be, and I will help you. This is the 6th time he's come to Missouri. I did some campaigning with him earlier at my request. This is a man who treats his employees like nobody I've ever met. He's a decent human being, an honorable human being, a patriot, and one of the great American heroes. I am proud to introduce to you my friend, my mentor, and a great American, Ambassador John Bolton.
Tom, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. As Tom said, I've been, over the past, beginning in his campaign in 2010, helping him out. And I think I can say this, I'm just delighted to be here at the Camden County Lincoln Day dinner. It's an honor to be invited. It's an honor to be with all of you who are so critical to the victories we expect to win in November and in other elections. But I will say this is the only Missouri Lincoln Day dinner I'm going to go to. The other 35 that Tom's going to go to, he's going to on his own. But it's indicative, I think, of the devotion to service that Tom has demonstrated during his 4 years as auditor. I'm confident that he'll be elected overwhelmingly again in November, given that the Democrats have just given up. And I know it's probably not the correct thing to say, but I'll say it anyway. I probably won't do any more fundraising for him in Missouri for the state auditor race, but I certainly look forward to coming back and doing fundraising for him for other races in the future. You know, who knows what will happen. But it is a real privilege to be with you here. It's the first time I've been to the Lake of the Ozarks. It's beautiful country. You're in the middle of our nation. This really is the heartland, and it's just inspiring to see so many people who share our values, especially since I live in Bethesda, a suburb of Washington. Maryland is where I was born and raised, but it truly is a one-party state. It reminds me of line Jim Baker, when he was chief of staff for Ronald Reagan, right before Reagan went to China for the first time, a reporter said to Baker, well, have you ever been to a communist country? And Baker said, yeah, I've been to Massachusetts. and it's a little bit like living in Maryland, you know. You're in a critical state. In facing critical elections, and it's a privilege and an honor for you to be in the front lines for so many important elections. I know Politics isn't necessarily the first thing you want to do every day, but the fact is that if you and others like you don't do this political work, we will find ourselves not just finished with 8 years of Obama, but with 8 years of an Obama clone in the White House. And our country can't afford that. So the work that you're doing now is critical. I can just tell you, you've got a lot more work to do in the years ahead. And I think that this is evident in many of the things we've talked about tonight with Obamacare and other of his domestic priorities. But honestly, the threats and crises we see internationally have reached a level where the nation really is facing a very, very difficult time. And part of our problem over the past 5 years is that we've got a president who doesn't talk about these threats and challenges that we face, doesn't really talk about national security unless the issue is pushed in front of him in a way that he can't avoid. And that really highlights what, to me, amidst all the crises we see around the world, highlights that the biggest national security problem that we have today is Barack Obama himself. People ask, how is it that the president can hold the views that he does? There are a lot of theories. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to give you that kind of theory. I'm just going to tell you what I believe he actually thinks, because it demonstrates how he gets to the conclusions that he does. In the first place, I don't think our president believes in American exceptionalism. I don't think he thinks we're an exceptional country. American exceptionalism is not a theory that we're better than others, but it reflects the historic reality that we're different, that we're a nation built around the ideal of freedom, and that it's a value that we're prepared to fight and die for. And that makes us different. The president was asked on his first trip to Europe, do you believe in American exceptionalism? And he gave a classic Obama response. He said, yes, I believe in American exceptionalism, just as the Brits believe in British exceptionalism and the Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism. Now let's parse that sentence. In the first third, he says he believes in it so that he can say to those who criticize him that he just said that he did. But in the second two-thirds of the sentence, he takes it back. You know, there are 193 countries in the United Nations. He could have gone on. Just as the Papua New Guineans believe in Papua New Guinean exceptionalism, just as the Burkina Fasosians believe in Burkina Fasosian exceptionalism, the point's very easy to understand. If everybody's exceptional, then nobody's exceptional. And that is a primary motivating force, I think, in the president's philosophy. The second is that, and it's a corollary to the first, that the United States is too powerful, too strong, too assertive, too dominant, too successful, and that it's our strength internationally that causes instability and conflict in the world. Now, I think that's like looking through the wrong end of a telescope, but he has said it to us over and over again. If you go back to his first speech to the United Nations as president, he said the following: "It is my deeply held belief that in the year 2009, more than at any point in human history," coincidentally, his first year in office, "more than at any point in human history, the interest of nations and peoples are shared. No world order that elevates one nation or group or people over another will succeed. No balance of power among nations will hold." Now, I thought about that for a long time to try and understand what exactly was he talking about. What does he mean when he said that no world order that elevates one nation above others will succeed? Who does he mean? And then I realized he means us. He means us. He thinks we're the problem, and that our dominance in the world is what really is the root cause of the problems that he needs to change. Now, the fact is that this philosophy has led to a foreign policy that has diminished American power in profound ways. As Congresswoman Hartzler talked about the budget cuts, which have been devastating to the military, we've lost political esteem, our economy has not recovered, and we're in a position now where American strength and determination around the world are called into question. The notion that it's American strength that causes the problem is like looking at the world through the wrong end of the telescope. It's not American strength that's provocative, it's American weakness that's provocative. Because our adversaries see weakness and inattention, and they recalibrate their own policies to take advantage of it. We can see it all over the world. Now, there's really a very simple answer to remedying the problem of the Obama foreign policy. And we saw it demonstrated nearly to perfection during the administration of Ronald Reagan. How do you advance American interests and avoid conflict? How do you preserve the peace but preserve what's important to the United States? And the doctrine that Reagan came up with was embodied in the very simple slogan of peace through strength. A strong America deters adversaries from trying to take advantage of us. It says to the other countries that think they can get away with undercutting our interests, don't even think about it. But it's a weak America that says to these same countries that they can pursue their agenda and not fear any consequences. Now, there's a curious thing that's happening in the Republican Party today, and I think it's important that we talk about it. There's a view out there that although it comes at the issue from a very different perspective than Barack Obama, ends up in the same place. It says America is too much in the world, that America's presence in the world is part of the problem, that we don't need to protect our interests and our friends and allies. Now, this is a form of neo-isolationism, something we haven't seen in the Republican Party, which has been the party of national security for 60-plus years. We haven't seen it really since the 1930s. And it's something that is just inexplicable to me among Republicans. No matter what side of the party you come from, I consider myself on domestic issues pretty libertarian. So when I want to know the foundations of philosophy, I often turn to Adam Smith. What did Adam Smith have to say about this very issue? In The Wealth of Nations, he said, the first duty of the sovereign is that of protecting the society against the violence and invasion of other independent societies. That's what Adam Smith said. And what did Ronald Reagan say? The top priority of the federal government is the safety of the country. That's perfectly obvious. Reagan said to his defense secretary, Cap Weinberger, defense is not a budget issue. Reagan said when we recommissioned the battleship New Jersey in 1982, yes, the cost is high, but the price of neglect would be infinitely higher. And that's something we can't forget, what Reagan called the vital margin of safety. And we can see it all around the world today. That vital margin of safety is being eroded. Look at what's happening in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin has a coherent strategy to reestablish Russian hegemony within the space of the former Soviet Union. He's using his oil and gas revenues to modernize and expand his military forces. He faces Barack Obama, who has no strategy and has spent 5 years cutting our defense forces. And what have we seen as a result? We have seen military forces cross an international border on the continent of Europe twice and change international boundaries with effectively no response from the United States. We've been down this road before. In the 1930s, it wasn't a happy experience. Now, can you imagine Ronald Reagan dealing with Vladimir Putin today? Do you think we would be following the same course? I don't think so. We've got an administration that thinks that it can talk its way through international problems with nothing in back of it. Look at the policy in the Middle East, an absolutely critical area to American interest. What has the administration done? It's promoted negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, which haven't quite failed yet, but they'll fail in another 2 weeks. Faced with this grinding, deadly civil conflict in Syria, the administration has tried negotiations on the theory that the Russians will help us ease the Assad regime out of power. And after 3 years, Assad's more entrenched in power than he has been at any point in the conflict. Those negotiations are failing. And they've tried negotiations with the Ayatollahs in Tehran over Iran's nuclear weapons program. And the result of those negotiations, Iran is now closer to achieving its 30-year-long objective of getting deliverable nuclear weapons than it ever has been before. We can see this pattern of failure all across the world. There's no country paying more attention to what's happening in the Ukraine than China, which has made incredibly assertive territorial claims in the East and South China Sea. Claims which, if they're able to make good on, can tie up the economic lifelines of Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and many of the East Asian nations in ways that would allow China to cripple those countries if they chose to exert their authority. What's our response? We call for the peaceful negotiation of these disputes. That's like calling for prayer. I mean, I'm all in favor of prayer. Do you think that's going to stop the Chinese? This is a question of whether the United States is going to be able to assert its interest in a way that makes it clear that we do not accept that our adversaries can work their will without any consequences. We do not accept that the proliferation of nuclear weapons by North Korea, by Iran, by others, is simply going to continue without effective American opposition. We do not accept that the terrorist threat all around the world is, as the administration's own director of national intelligence testified 2 months ago, at the same level it was right before September the 11th. You know, we've heard the administration say over and over again, the war on terror is over. The president said during the 2012 campaign, Osama bin Laden is dead and General Motors is alive. As if that meant that we could ignore the threat of terrorism, or even worse, ignore the threat of terrorists who acquire nuclear weapons. The risk that the next September the 11th will be a September the 11th with weapons of mass destruction. This problem over and over again has demonstrated both to our adversaries around the world and to our friends that they've got an administration that has no bearings, no strategy, no intention of protecting the United States effectively. And there's no better example of the failure of the Obama administration's policy than in dealing with the assassination of Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans in Benghazi on September the 11th, 2012. And we could spend a lot of time examining what the administration did wrong before September the 11th, pursuing the notion that Libya had stabilized, that there was no terrorist threat, that there was no need for enhanced security for the ambassador. We could pursue what they've done, what they did wrong on the date of the attack by not responding adequately, by leaving Americans out at the end of a telephone line with no protection and no intention of making any efforts to give them protection. Do you know what Secretary of State Clinton has admitted publicly? That from the time she heard the attack in Benghazi was underway, all through that evening, into the night until the next day, she never once talked to the Secretary of Defense. I've worked for 6 separate Secretaries of State, very different people. There's not a one of them in those circumstances that wouldn't have been on the phone all night long until they protected their people. But what we can agree on more than anything else is the failure in the aftermath of Benghazi. It's now a year and a half since the terrorist attacked that facility. And even under the administration's theory that terrorism is just a law enforcement matter, they haven't done a thing. Nobody's been arrested. But even worse, there's been no retaliation, there's been no retribution, there's been no punishment. These murders were committed, and the murderers have paid no price. Now, you know, when an American ambassador goes overseas, he or she just doesn't preside over a large embassy staff. They are, each of them, the personal representative of the President of the United States. That's their principal mission. When an American ambassador drives in the streets of the capital of the country they're accredited to, our flag flies on the right front fender of their car. Everybody knows who's in that car. So the lesson of Benghazi under Barack Obama is that you can kill the personal representative of the President of the United States and do it with impunity. That is a terrible lesson for the terrorists to learn, for the state sponsors of terrorism, for our adversaries in Moscow and Beijing and the rogue states. It's a terrible lesson for our friends to see this weakness on the part of the United States. And, you know, Secretary of State Clinton may say, what difference does it make at this point? We're here to tell him it makes a big difference, and you're not going to forget it. We need, as citizens, to make it clear that I think the overwhelming majority of the American population believes, as we do not accept an America that is weak and declining. We do not accept an American military that is weak and poorly equipped. And in particular, we do not accept an American president who is weak, indecisive, and apologetic about our country. We know that the way to protect our interests and our liberty around the world is to return to what Ronald Reagan taught us 30 years ago. We need to replace the Obama, Biden, Clinton, Kerry policy of drift, decline, and defeat with a Reaganite policy of assertive American interest. That is the key, I think, to preserving the security of our country, and I think it's a key to political success this November and in 2016. Thank you very much.
Now, as we are excused tonight, I want to say, hey, thanks for coming. God bless you. God bless our county, our state, our country, and God bless America.